Today in the News Digest, more than 90,000 Russians in 3 winter months. Putin loses more personnel than he is able to send to the war. The Russian so-called second army in the world shows the worst results for the last century. Only tens of meters a day of moving forward on the ground. Zelenskyy offers Middle East help to take down Shahed drones, but there is one condition. 92,850 Russian occupiers killed and wounded over the course of 3 winter months, as confirmed by Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky. Moreover, in February 2026, the Defense Forces regained control of more Ukrainian territory and Russian forces captured. Deep state analysts estimate that Russia gained control in February of 126 square kilometers, which is twice less than in January, and the lowest figure in 2 years.
We are conducting effective active operations on the Oleksandrivsky and Hulyapol directions. Despite repeated statements by the Russian leadership, we are stepping up control over Kupiansk and cutting down on the headcount of enemy infiltrators in the city. We continue to hold back the invaders in the Pokrovsk-Mirnorod agglomeration. We are standing firm. Alexander Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Ukrainian airborne troops have broken through Russian defense lines in the Oleksandrivka direction. As a result, liberation of 9 communities, and the destruction of a significant amount of Russian equipment. The airborne forces of Ukraine confirmed that the operation was carried out in accordance with a previously well-prepared plan. Within a week, as a result of decisions taken and the proper use of technical means, as well as Russian forces had no access to the Starlink network that was restricted, which was a big help for Ukraine, as it significantly affected the enemy's awareness, in particular, and complicated the command and control in general at the initial stage of the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. Although the Russians did not halt their offensive actions in full and still continued advancing, which did not help them at all.
The air assault forces noted that their military units and subunits are continuing to carry out active offensive operations on the Oleksandrivka front, imposing their own conditions of battle on the Russians. In the course of the operation, the Russians are being systematically and decisively pushed out of fortified positions. Large-scale and precision strikes are destroying Russian manpower, weapons, military hardware, and specialized equipment. From the statement of command of the air assault forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Cannon fodder, meat waves, no flea squads shooting at Russians if they run. The Kremlin does not care about how many more Russians will die, serving his ill imperial ambitions. Putin and his army might be in any trouble whatsoever. Russian dictator will never acknowledge that. And he would always want more. Ukraine is aware of Russia's plans. It is not hard to get intel, really, as those plans just never change.
The Russian failed to achieve any of their primary objectives for 2025. We understand that their directions remain unchanged. The occupation of the east of our state, namely Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, they definitely want to continue advancing towards Zaporizhzhia Oblast and also towards Dnipro. It is difficult for them, however, they are still glancing at the Odessa region. We see all of this, but their efforts have nothing in common with the real state of affairs.
The Russian military in Ukraine is demonstrating the slowest offensive pace seen in any major military campaign of the last century. That is the resume of a new analytical report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. According to expert estimates, since the beginning of 2024, the average advance of Russian forces on key fronts has fluctuated between as much as mere 15 and 70 meters per day. Despite Putin's threats to seize the entire Donetsk region by the end of 2025, he remains remarkably far from that goal as we enter March 2026.
Russia will need approximately 1.5 years to fully occupy Donetsk region, stated Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Brigadier General Pavlo Polisa. For Moscow, this will cost enormous resources, both material and human. In 2025, the aggressor country managed to capture less than 1% of Ukraine's territory. At the same time, the Russian command lost more than 450,000 soldiers, killed and wounded, over the year.
They have not abandoned the capture of Donetsk region. They are still planning to create a buffer zone on the territory of Kharkiv and Sumy regions. They expect to advance as far as possible into Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions and create conditions to claim the capture of Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa. As of now, objectively, I do not see any opportunities for the Russians to implement these plans in the next 6 months. Pavlo Palisam, Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, in an interview with the Radio Free Europe television project Donbass Realities.
The pace of advance of the Russian army in Ukraine is the lowest in more than a century of modern warfare history, analysts from the Center for Strategic and International Studies concluded. The offensive on Chasiv Yar, which began in February 2024, progressed at a speed of 15 meters per day. In less than 2 years, the Russian army advanced only 10 kilometers and has still not gained full control of the city. Notably, the occupiers have not reduced the intensity of assaults. This indicates exhaustion of the occupation troops and a decline in the quality of their resources, experts assert.
The Russians are now mostly trying to attack Ukrainian logistics and regroup. This is obvious because, first, they are preparing for a larger offensive, and second, they themselves have logistical and command problems after losing Starlink. They need some time to prepare, although it is unlikely they will fully compensate for the absence of this technology. Viktor Trehubov, spokesperson for the Joint Forces Task Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on the United News telethon.
The Ukrainian army has broken through Russian defenses on the Oleksandrivka direction, reported the command of the airborne assault troops of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. During the combat operation, Ukrainian reconnaissance units destroyed enemy firing positions, eliminated personnel, and struck ammunition storage sites. Thus, the enemy's plans to advance along the administrative border of Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions were thwarted, and a bridgehead was opened for Ukrainian troops.
The enemy has not been able to build up its resources, let alone mobilize its main strike forces to implement this strategic offensive plan. There are no systemic advances, except, as we note, some villages and settlements have already been destroyed.
The situation in the Pokrovsk-Mir-Norod agglomeration remains difficult, reported the command of the East Troop Grouping. Russian commanders are bringing in additional reserves and increasing the intensity of airstrikes. The enemy is using infiltration tactics with small infantry groups, employing quad bikes and other equipment. Defense Forces units continue to hold back the Russian invaders. The aggressor is suffering significant losses on this section of the front. Overall combat losses of Russia since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine have already exceeded 1,268,000 soldiers. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, the Armed Forces of Ukraine destroyed 5 Russian tanks, 20 armored combat vehicles, 47 artillery systems, 6 air defense systems, 1 ship, and 235 units of enemy automotive equipment the day before.
They struck very powerfully at the enemy's reserves, and that is why losses of up to 1,000 people from various enemy units every day indicate that the reserves of the Russian army are not being replenished. They could mobilize up to 28,000 people per month. We were destroying approximately 30 to 35,000 per month.
Operators of the unmanned systems forces struck air defense assets of the aggressor country's army. Fighters from the first separate center of the unmanned systems forces delivered precision strikes against a radar station and a launcher of the S-300 anti-aircraft missile system near temporarily occupied Mariupol. This significantly reduced the enemy's ability to control airspace and complicated target detection and missile guidance, reported by Victoria Chistukina, UATV News.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump states the U.S. have as much weapons to fight forever and are preparing for big blow to the Iranian regime, as he also blames Joe Biden for the weaponry shortage, as Biden sent too much military aid to Ukraine. We failed to find any logic here whatsoever, so no comments, just direct quoting.
Sleepy Joe Biden spent all of his time and our country's money giving everything to P.T. Barnum, Zelenskyy, of Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars worth. And while he gave so much of the super high-end away, free, he didn't bother to replace it. Donald Trump, President of the United States, on Truth Social.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy confirmed Ukraine is ready to help Middle Eastern countries to shield themselves from Iranian Shahed drones. As a favor in return, Ukraine is asking Arab leaders to put pressure on Moscow.
The Middle East maintains close economic ties and relations with the Russian Federation and holds significant influence. If they were to signal Russia to observe a ceasefire for a period of, say, 1 or 2 months, we could then deploy our specialists to protect the civilian population.
As Politico puts it in its article, Iran became the latest country after Syria and Venezuela to feel firsthand what partnership with Russia does and doesn't mean. Since launching its full-scale war in Ukraine 4 years ago, the Kremlin has flexed its rhetorical muscle as the flag-bearer of a so-called multipolar world. But at decisive moments, its response on the ground in allied nations has been conspicuously anemic, as their leaders came under attack. First, Syria's Bashar al-Assad learned in late 2024 that Russian backing did not guarantee the survival of his regime, as rebel forces rampaged into Damascus. Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, sitting in an American prison cell since early this year, will also be pondering where the Kremlin was in his hour of need. Recently, Iran's dictator Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed during the assault on Tehran, and Russia did nothing about it. Again, Iran now threatens to become the latest example of the discrepancy between the Kremlin's big talk in the face of American hegemony and the real world, where that hegemony is increasingly on full display. Well, not exactly Russia did nothing. Russia did send its condemnation. And again, quoting Politico's article, Russia's failure to intervene in Iran undoubtedly represents a reputational blow on the global stage. But it also might bring some spoils of war. Moscow will be hoping to deflect attention away from itself by highlighting the West's, and particularly the US's, failure to live up to international norms.
The peacekeeper is at it again. The talks with Iran were just a cover. Everyone knew that. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, on X.
So that is a new Putin's mantra that he will use as a talking point when trying to cover up his weakness in Syria, Venezuela, or now, Iran. Big Bad West is at the door, and this is like good old Russia just had to invade Ukraine. Ukraine has its own point of view on the aftermath of Iran's regime falling, as per Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga.
Iran and Russia signed a 20-year comprehensive strategic partnership agreement last year, but Putin is probably more concerned about rising oil prices than his partners in Tehran. At the most critical moment, Russia will simply wash its hands. This has happened many times. The fall of Assad, Maduro, and Khamenei will have strategic consequences for the regime in Moscow, bringing its own collapse closer. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on X.
Russia has not only not helped its ally, it has not yet even initiated a corresponding official statement on events in Iran from the BRICS organization, despite the fact that Iran joined the group 2 years ago. So much for Putin's friendship. That's all for today's News Digest. Stay informed, stay sharp, and stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next update.